Welcome to another conversation in People in Fundraising. This podcast features interviews with nonprofit professionals who discuss their career journeys, lessons learned, and enthusiasm for working in fundraising. And here's your host, the founder of People in Fundraising, Tim Wilson.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tim Wilson. I am the founder and host of the People in Fundraising webcast series. I launched this effort about a year ago to welcome people from the nonprofit world to share their experiences as a professional and as a person working in the social impact sector, sort of a human interest conversation series. And today I am really delighted to welcome Beth Inman to our program. Hello, Beth.
Hi, Tim.
How's it going?
It's going very well. Thank you.
Excellent.
Thanks
Well,
for
thank
having
you
me.
yes, my pleasure. Thanks for making time today. Beth is currently the Senior Director of Prospect and Donor Research at Shriners Children's, and she joins us from North Carolina. And before we went live, Beth and I were talking a little bit, and Beth told me that she's been at Shriners for about 6 months. So how has that transition been? And is it a fully remote opportunity? And
It is a fully remote opportunity. I'm grateful for the opportunity to to work remotely from my home in North Carolina. And the first 6 months has been, as anyone who's started a new job, there's a lot of drinking from the fire hose, especially with being handed 2 open positions on my first day, which I was grateful for because my team is growing. So it was welcome to Shriners Children's, and you have 2 new positions to hire. So imagine hiring people for positions on your team when you've just started. So those, we're all 3 of us are learning. And also it's a different kind of organization that I've worked for. So it's healthcare, which I have not done yet. So it's been a lot of learning, but I am very grateful to have a great team, and my boss is fantastic. So it's been a very good first 6 months.
Oh, dynamite.
Yeah.
And have you filled those 2 positions?
Yes, I have.
Good for you.
I did not waste time in that. Who would?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not your boss, but I feel like, hey, if you've got goals for the year, filling the 2 positions from the get-go would be everything else is gravy, Beth.
Absolutely.
Dynamite. Well, Beth, I'd love to jump in to your career history, and if you want to tell us a little bit about how you entered the nonprofit sector. Some guests talk about their undergraduate and or graduate studies. They talk about if they worked outside of nonprofits beforehand or how they became familiar with it. But let's hear your story, please.
Absolutely. My professional career started in the museum world, actually the art museum world. And I got a bachelor's degree in art history from the University of North Carolina at Greensboro in Greensboro, North Carolina. And pretty much figured out that if I did want to go into museums, I needed my master's. So moved from Charlotte, North Carolina to Columbia and got my master's in art history at the University of South Carolina. And when I finished that degree, I was able to get a job as an associate curator of American and decorative art at the Columbia Museum of Art. So lots of arts there. I apologize.
That's totally fine.
But that was where my career started, and loved it. Lots of reading, lots of writing, lots of great experience in exhibition design, and also working with the development team at the museum. So that was my first intro into development. I would have never thought, funny enough, I would have ended up in development. But, I worked with donors of art. So people who would either give or loan their work to the museum. So coming into development, I was sort of familiar with the very big picture concept. But life ended up leading me to Charleston, South Carolina. And when I was there, I was temping at the Citadel, which is the military college of South Carolina. which
Yeah.
it's not a service academy like West Point or the Naval Academy. Only about a third of the graduates end up going into the military, but it is very
Mm.
military based. And
Yeah.
a friend there said, "Oh, the Citadel Foundation is hiring a prospect researcher. You should check it out." And so I
Uh-huh.
applied and I got an interview. And funny story, I did not get it.
Oh.
So my first try, I did not get it. So, okay, it moved along. But then about a week later, I got a call from the HR office at the Citadel Foundation. And they said, "Would you be interested in interviewing for the role of executive assistant for the new chief development officer?"
Oh,
And after a few basic questions, I was like, sure.
yeah.
So I interviewed with Terry Mularkey, and within a week, I had an offer and shifted over to that was my entree into development. And
Okay.
Terry is still a fabulous mentor. And it was really cool to learn this world from him and from that role, because I did everything from balance, travel expenses. I helped make his donor appointments when he was
Mm.
traveling, helped him with his relationships with the people on campus. I learned Razor's Edge, gift agreements. I mean, it just
Wow.
was a really great being thrown in feet first way to get into it. And then about a year later, they created the foundation created what was my title there? Director of development operations, I think, basically prospect development. And
Okay.
so I got promoted into that role.
Wow.
And so the rest is history.
Uh-huh.
And that's how I got into it. And as much as I loved the art world and the museum world, and, ended up doing some adjunct teaching for art history programs here and there. It happened in a long time. I
Mm.
love development and prospect research. Can't imagine doing anything else.
So cool. That is great.
Yeah.
I've got a couple of follow-up questions.
Yeah.
I just think it's fascinating that you were the executive assistant and you're drinking from a fire hose and all these different exposures, and then you get elevated to director of development operations there after the prospect research opportunity didn't
Mm-hmm.
originally pan out. Were there things about prospect research, prospect development at that stage in your career that as you look back, that you thought those elements attracted me more, as opposed to when you were working at the museums and interfacing with donors, or when you were working and supporting Terry and the various things you were doing there? What may have been the elements that kind of,
Oh, that's a great question.
yeah.
Um, what I think helped was what Terry was doing.
Mm.
And he was really formalizing the program in terms of the fundraisers, instituting metrics, really using the database a lot more than it was. And,
Mm.
to get things like meetings and phone calls and event attendance and event conversations entered into the database. I don't need to go
Yeah.
into that, why that's important here. And it's funny because I think having a background in art history, I really never thought I would never have called myself a numbers person.
Mm.
But I think getting that role and then seeing what he was doing and how collecting the information, tracking the information, reporting on it, I think that's where I really thought I really am a numbers person. Now,
Mm.
am I good in math? No. But, how those numbers are important, I think was what really helped. And the director position that I was promoted into was new.
Mm.
So what we had before was one prospect researcher, and she did the prospect research. She produced profiles when they were needed for visits or events, and she was
Yeah.
great. But I think the opportunity to, I guess I kind of skipped a step, which I'm grateful for that opportunity again. The opportunity to work with Terry on really instituting more of those things, working with the numbers. I worked with the database administrator at the time on a dashboard, which was completely new to me,
Oh,
and
cool.
how that worked. And so I think that's what really called to me. And I learned in that role and working with the prospect researcher. And then we hired another one and a grant
Mm.
writer. I kind of learned along with them, what ended up taking me to the next steps.
Oh, so cool.
Yeah.
Really neat. And I'm fascinated by I'm trying to understand a little bit more about, how do you, find the creative outlets, whether it's professionally or personally, that, were meaningful to you at a different time of life.
Hmm.
And then also, because I'm not a math person either, like, oh, goodness, I've got bad memories of junior high and high school math.
Oh, I
Um,
can't. I can't.
um, and so, yeah, like how do you work with numbers as part of your day job when, there is this, kind of a struggle to use numbers well. And so
Mhm.
my wife is a math education major,
Oh,
and
wow.
I mean, it just can run laps around me when it comes to math stuff. And so I just, for me, it's like I have this innate fear of numbers. So, but like you, it's part of my day job as well.
Sure.
So just talk to us about, both the creative outlets as well as applying math with that
Yeah.
background.
And when I say math, I'm going to use air quotes, math. My daughter asked me a long time ago, she's in college now, and she was fussing about math and when am I ever going to use it and
Yeah.
whatever she was doing at the time. And I was like, honestly, I don't know. I don't
Uh-huh.
know when you're going to use it, but you still have to do it right now. But
Yes.
creative outlets, even though I'm not in, and I haven't been in the museum world for 15 years, more than 15 years now, but they're very much still, I still love visiting museums.
Mm,
Wherever we've lived, I've joined a museum so that I can go and then support it as well.
awesome.
And I mentioned I was an adjunct professor. So for a
Yeah.
while, that was a really fun way to open the eyes of people. And admittedly, they were taking because it was a requirement. I know that they weren't, especially like at the Citadel or at a community college in Columbia, they weren't going to take the same path I did, but just being able to help people learn more about art was awesome.
Oh,
But
sure.
as you probably know, teaching is a huge time commitment and, planning classes and lectures, I just didn't have time for it
Yeah.
anymore. So really it's just a hobby now. But
Uh-huh.
at work, for anyone who knows me who listens to this, they're gonna laugh because they will probably guess that I'm going to talk about Excel and pivot tables and various ways to visualize the data. So, I'm not going to pretend that I can do Power BI or Tableau and any of those sophisticated methods of visualizing data. I can't. But that
Yeah.
was one of my new hires as a data analyst, and so she is
Nice.
can take all of my ideas and she can make it happen. But
Smart.
um, just for the basics, if I have a meeting with my boss or her boss, taking data and actually looking at a spreadsheet now that we talked about today for how do I help tell the story to the chief development officer at Shriners Children's about how do I help tell the story of what our fundraisers are doing and how
Yeah.
many asks they have, and to be able to make it work and tell the story for him in a 30-minute meeting.
Mm-hmm.
I love being able to do that. And I have help, of course. Like I said, I have a data analyst, but as when you're meeting with someone at that level and you have 30 minutes and
Mm-hmm.
I can't just send him a big spreadsheet with 36 columns and say, okay, let's talk about it. It's really thinking about, okay, how do I take all of this information and distill it down and visualize it so that I can get his input, thoughts, and then, with our recommended next steps, where do we want to go? And so that's where for me, being creative is fun.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
And so right on about you have a limited time with a very important, client,
Yes.
in this sense. And so how do you best consolidate the information for her or his
Hmm.
benefit and impact? So
It's so important. A boss a few years ago, I think I sent her a spreadsheet and she was very kind, but said, I don't have time to I don't have time to look at this and figure it out. You
Yeah.
take it and tell me what you want me to know from it. And that has really stuck with me.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So what do you look, and of course, like each project will be different, but in general, Beth, what are you looking for when you've got, 36 columns of data? Where does your mind and your eyes kind of instinctively go first?
Sure. Well, and looking at the one we talked about today, and only just because it's on my other monitor, so I'm going to use that as an example. In preparing for the meeting and having some key takeaways, sometimes I really have to stare at it for a while because I don't want to, again, in that limited time, I don't want to bring up like the most obvious things. If he is going to look at it, I want to make sure I'm taking it one step further.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, one of the observations I made was the average ask amounts and the average closed amounts, gift closure amount, were very similar. And so I said, if we really drill down into that, we think that my observation, my hypothesis, if you will, is that the asks or proposals aren't being entered unless they know it's a sure thing.
Oh,
Which
yeah.
I understand. I get it. I get what they're coming from. But if you think big picture and, our team development, not just my team, is growing and trying to be more strategic and build relationships as opposed to transactional fundraising, we need to know when you're asking and what the ultimate amount or not is in, how we do modeling projects and that type thing. So that was one of the first things that stuck out to me. The other one was I looked at the average days to close. So when the proposal was created or opened to when it closed. And again, it kind of points to, when the window was closed. I'll say the window was pretty close. So proposals are being created and then almost immediately they're closing, which, there are various explanations for that. And there's certainly we did medians. So there's some variation in that data, but it makes me think, are we really opening that proposal or starting it when the cultivation starts or when you start planning your solicitation, that there should be more time? So again, I wanted to dig like past that first initial layer, but obviously we weren't going to what do we philosophize about it?
Right.
But those were the couple of things that stood out to me from this particular data set.
Very cool. Yeah, I love hearing how other people in similar in prospect development, how they approach large data sets and how do they contextualize the most relevant information. And I think I like that you use medians, as you mentioned, for these different metrics. And I think you can probably relate to that. You don't want to, for good and for bad, like shine a spotlight on any one particular gift officer as in front of their ultimate boss either. So like this.
Exactly. Especially when we were looking at, everything from assistant directors of development all the way up, to the major gift officers are our highest, because they're not apples to apples. So you want to be very mindful of who you're comparing, because I certainly don't want to throw anyone under the bus.
Right.
This was very big picture.
Dynamite. Well, Beth, another reason why I wanted to have you on as a guest today is I'm trying, to show the diverse backgrounds and walks of life of people who work in nonprofits. And you've held, as you talked about, roles in arts and at the Citadel, higher education, now in healthcare. You've lived in several states, and that, geographic as well as sector diversity has always fascinated me in our profession. And I get it from like a frontline fundraiser perspective. I think there is generally more, and not acceptance, but it's just sort of like that's how it is. Like you move up and you move out, and you have to go somewhere else to move up. But for us in prospect development, I think I love the idea of tell me how did it work for you in having that diverse background when it comes time to seeking out other opportunities, as well as demonstrating to prospective employers, well, this is why I'm interested in this opportunity at this institution at this time. Because I think, from some hiring managers, it could be like, oh man, Tim has lived in 4 different states and he's been at, multiple jobs for like 12 months at a time.
Sure.
I've always been, in my own mind, kind of hypersensitive to those impressions of flight risk. Now, of course, with the younger generation, the expectation is like, you will work for like 8 months at one job and then move along. So
I know, it's amazing how that's changed.
Yeah. But I started my career in the Bill Clinton administration times. So very different. So in your experience, how has that geographic and institutional diversity benefited you professionally and personally?
Sure. Being at the Citadel, I was there 3.5 years, I think. And I will say that I've been in I think all but one of my positions in my prospect development career, I've been the first person in the role. So I don't know how that has worked out, but it is definitely a niche. And so my shift from the Citadel to the University of South Carolina, that was a new role at South Carolina. And through someone I knew, put me in touch with the hiring manager there. And I think that coming from higher ed, my shifting over to South Carolina was a benefit. And they were in the silent phase of $1 billion capital campaign. But they did not have a really formalized prospect research team at the time. And so they had researchers and they were doing great work, but they basically needed that role that I was ultimately hired in to take it to the next level so that we would meet the $1 billion goal. We did. But so I think in that case, that made me a good candidate because I was coming directly from higher ed. And then I was at South Carolina for, I think, 6.5 years. And I went from there to JDRF, the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation. And again, that was a new position that they were creating, but pretty much for the same reasons. There was a researcher and she was doing fantastic work, still is. But, they were trying to really build up more of their major gift program. And it's great when these organizations know that a role like a prospect development senior director or whatever, that's key to that effort being successful.
Yes.
So, that was really that I took because it was just a great opportunity. It gave me an opportunity to do prospect development at a national cause-based organization. And I know, by that time I'd been in the field almost 10 years. So I think that, they saw it as I had 10 years of experience and maybe higher ed was the secondary part of that. And then, COVID, when you said flight risk, it made me laugh because I know I am not unique in this, but COVID really threw a wrench in, we all can make plans and what we want to do, and then COVID came along and, excuse me, I was furloughed. When you work for an organization whose revenue so heavily depends on events, and everything started shutting down right before spring, which was when, at JDRF in particular, they have so many walks and galas. They really, I think half of the organization was furloughed.
Whoa.
So that just really, everything, again, those plans that I laugh about now kind of came to a screeching halt. And that's how I ended up at Colby College in Maine. And so that was such a great opportunity as well. Small college, New England. Anyone listening can probably tell I'm a native Southerner based on my accent. So that was a really great opportunity, both for work, in my career, small private school, but also just being in New England. And I got involved with NEDRA. So that was just a really great organization, again, for me to learn. So I guess big picture, I don't want to keep drawing on my entire career history, but I think that the variety of experience has helped from the sense of now that I've been in the field as long as I have. And each organization, as you know, does it slightly differently. Whether it's a national cause based or now I'm in healthcare, there's some things that are very standard across, like we're going to look up for a phone number or property ownership or philanthropic giving. You and I are going to look it up the same way, ultimately. But the what drives the work that you do is very different. And so, Shriners in particular, it's so interesting because when I have started at any organization, the refrain I've always heard was, we need new prospects, and that's true. Everyone needs new prospects. But what I found so interesting is Shriners, the fundraisers have been communicating to me, we have so many donors. We need to know who we should focus on.
Oh, interesting.
So we have a lot of recurring, the commercials and $19 a month. And, so we have a lot volume of donors. And so part of what my team is doing is trying to take all of those and identifying who we can move up through the major gift identification process. So I don't know. That was a really long answer.
No, it's fine.
Every organization has informed decisions that I've made at the new organization.
Really cool.
Because it doesn't always work. What I did in higher ed doesn't work at a healthcare, and we're unique because even though we're healthcare, we don't have a grateful patient program at the time.
Right.
Because our model is so different than a hospital, another type of hospital foundation.
Sure. Well, that's interesting. Yeah, and Beth, before we went recording today, you were telling me about, your work is specifically with Shriners Children's, and the average person is aware of, when they hear the word Shriners, they think of a different Shriners International. So if you want to just take a minute or two to talk with us about the distinctions and overlaps, please.
Sure, of course. So Shriners Children's is the hospital, and it is a separate organization from Shriners International, which is the fraternity, which you've seen, the Fez, and the temples. So that's typically what most people think of when they think of Shriners. And obviously we work together. Some of our fundraisers are assigned to work with the temples, clubs, and units. We have various degrees of groups, but they are two different organizations.
Okay.
And the children's, and people often ask, and I hope you don't mind if I proactively answer the question that I often get about how we're different than St. Jude's, which is that we have 20 locations across the country. So we have 20 clinical locations. And our mission is to improve children's care. And we provide pediatric specialty care for kids who are up to age 18, who have orthopedic conditions, burns, spinal cord injuries, cleft lip and palate. And but like St. Jude's, we treat them regardless of the family's ability to pay. So St. Jude's focuses more on childhood cancers so we have, while we both work with and treat children, the actual medical parts of that are different. So a lot of our donors give to both, which I think is wonderful.
Oh, phenomenal.
Yeah.
And thank you for sharing that distinction. And if I have it right, Shriners Children's celebrated its 100th anniversary last year. So you've been here for 6 months, and tell us what role you may have played, in those moments of the centennial, but also in a larger sense, what does it mean for you professionally and personally to work for Shriners Children's?
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. So last year we did celebrate Shriner Children's, our 100th anniversary, which was awesome. And by the time I started the planning for the Centennial Gala, which was in Houston, was well underway. And
Okay.
so my team produced profiles for the host committee for that gala, which was held at Minute Maid Park. So it was a
Oh, wow.
huge event
Wow.
and very successful. So that
Awesome.
was, I didn't get the opportunity to go, but it made me very happy that leadership was happy with what we provided. And then just overall, it was such a big success. There were table sponsors and a silent auction, and
Mm.
it just was I think everyone, I don't want to say everyone was surprised, but I think at the end of the day, with an event of that scope, everyone was very pleased with how it turned out.
Awesome.
And being a part of, I will say, being a part of an organization like Shriners, and seeing an event like that happen, and just the history, it is, our donors are so generous. I mean, we
Mm.
have, like I mentioned, the volume of our donors is, we have a lot, which is wonderful. It's a great, I don't want to say problem, it's a great thing to say we have a lot of donors. But
Yeah.
also, when I hear the stories that gift officers share at our team meetings about why people give and people's motivation to give, and it's not
Mhm.
always that they were a patient or their children were patients. It's that my best friend in elementary school was a patient, and
Oh, wow.
the care of their care really helped change their lives. And
Mm.
I'm working on visiting some of our hospitals just so I can meet the fundraisers and see the different locations. And I visited our Greenville, South Carolina location last December, and I will tell you that, being able to actually see where all of that happens and meet a
Yeah.
doctor and a few nurses and the people who work on all the prosthetics and orthopedic equipment, it was
Mm.
pretty amazing. And,
Yeah, I'm
when
sure.
you think about the everyday frustrations that all of us have, it kind of puts it into perspective when you actually can see what you're working on. And
Mm-hmm.
it's a very cool feeling to honestly feel like I'm making a difference. My team is finding not new donors, but finding donors to move up the pipeline, and
Yeah.
providing information on the ones we already have. So it's really cool.
That is so great. And I think having that sort of tangible sense of the impact you're making in roles that we hold, my day job is at a public university.
Mm-hmm.
But I worked in healthcare before too. And I think that just magnified what I felt was like a very small contribution to the
Mm-hmm.
work of a cause-based or a healthcare organization. But to see whether it's, as you mentioned, the physicians, the nursing staff, the facilities, the equipment, it really hits home in a
It
profound
does.
way.
It does.
Yeah, dynamite. Well, Beth, we have about 5 more minutes here. The time went by pretty quick. This has been
It
just a
sure did.
delightful conversation. um, I'd like to give you the chance. Either we can address one of the other questions we haven't gotten to. There were a couple about your Apra plug into leadership
Mm-hmm.
speaker at a conference, or we can talk about sort of daily rituals from a New York Times article. I pull in
Mm-hmm.
content like that because I want to get like the human interest side of people as well.
Yeah.
Or if there's anything else that you are preparing that you would like to chat about, the floor
Yeah.
is yours.
Awesome. I loved the little rituals question. So
Okay.
I read through the article, and that was, I'd love to cover that in our last few minutes. And so
Yeah.
it really made me think I am a creature of habit. But now that I don't have a kid at home anymore to help get ready for school and push out the door, I really enjoy starting my morning off slowly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which means having a cup of coffee, and I do the Wordle. Try to finish it in the morning and just scan the headlines of the Washington Post.
Okay.
And I wish I could say like I read it, quote unquote, cover to cover. It's on my iPad.
Yeah.
But I really like easing into the day that way.
Yeah.
So, and then as we mentioned earlier, I'm fully remote. So I'm not getting ready for a commute and a ride in the car and having to formally get ready for work. But I do like the differentiation of kind of ending that daily ritual. And then I try to exercise in the morning and then get ready for work. So it's, now it's nothing nice, but it's yoga pants and a t-shirt, but I'm still, quote, I'm getting ready for work. And that really helps me, then I come upstairs to my office and it really helps me differentiate that between work time and personal time, which I know is something that we all, I don't want to say struggle with, but I'm very conscious of, keeping that time separately. And as a manager, I do the same thing. I don't want anyone on my team to burn out. And I have recently started, I'm learning to crochet.
Oh,
and
nice.
So learning something new has been really fun. And it's more in the evening, and doing some of that. But I was inspired by Michelle Obama's new book, The Light We Carry. I think we talked about that before we started recording, but in it, she talks about during the pandemic when everything shut down, that she took up knitting, and she did it as a way to rest her mind, but work her hands, which I thought was a really interesting distinction of, not just sitting and watching TV. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I do it, but it's almost been my way of meditating.
I like that.
Just kind of mindlessly do that work and either watch TV or listen to a book or whatever. So those are my daily rituals.
I love that, Beth. Thank you for sharing those.
Sure.
I find it fascinating, what makes people tick and what are either the established rituals they have, to start or end their day, or I'm going to try something new and see how consistent I can be at that. That's really cool. And I like that, quiet your mind, but work your hands.
Yes, that just really spoke to me. So
I'm
definitely learning. It's not very pretty yet, but it's not about that.
Well, maybe in a couple of years, I'll have you back on the program and you can have the crochet behind you.
I would love that.
Yes, before we started recording, as Beth mentioned, we were talking about books, audiobooks and other books, and found that we have a similar interest in David Grohl and Nirvana and U2 as well. So, definitely children of the 90s here. So.
Absolutely.
Well, Beth, any last thoughts, any parting comments?
No, just thank you so much for having me. This was really fun. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
My pleasure, Beth. This has been a real delight. You're very active on LinkedIn and certainly in the Apra community, the Prospect Development International Organization. And so having you on and just saying thank you for the time that you volunteer, the expertise you give to benefit people across the country. It's definitely noticed. That's why I want, again, why I want to have you on.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, because I think, there's certainly the day job aspect of what we do, and there's the time before and after work, but also it's so important to have people like you carve out time and say, hey, I've got an idea. I've seen this work. I want to share it with other people too. So very cool. Thank you for doing that. It's great to have dedicated members of our community. So
it sure is. Thanks, Tim.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Beth, for your time today. And thank you to our audience who have commented, watched, listened to these interviews, coming up on almost a year now of the People in Fundraising series. Thank you. I appreciate that. And best wishes to you on hitting your first year at Shriners and for continued success, Beth.
Thank you, Tim.
Have a good day, everyone. Thanks for your time.